Today's episode has been brought to you by
Schedulity.
Welcome to episode 60 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. Today we meet Sarah Helt. Sarah is a power vinyasa and restorative yin yoga teacher who began working with disabled athletes. In recent years, Sarah partnered with Accessible Yoga in Santa Barbara, California as the Director of Communications and Marketing. If you are new here, welcome. I'm your host, Shannon, a mother of three, a yoga teacher, and a consultant for yoga teachers who want to create a sustainable yoga business that serves them and their community. Maybe you're a returning listener, and I'm just grateful that you're back listening, that you've pressed play. How is everyone doing this week? I get it. As a yoga teacher, you have all the planning of classes, traveling to workshops, classes, trainings, setting your prices and your schedule, doing all of the things a yoga teacher does on top of being an entrepreneur and a business owner. So the marketing, the accounting, maintaining a website, posting on social media, it is a lot. And I just want you to know that I'm here on the journey with you, and this podcast is here for you as well. Every week we're here so that you can press play and connect to a supportive community between the classes, workshops, and trainings that you are teaching or attending. The Connected Yoga Teacher podcast was created so that you have information, ideas, stories, and actionable steps every single week from yoga teachers and other professionals. It has been an interesting week here for me and just our entire household. We had a spring snowstorm, including a snow day for my two youngest ones who are in high school and elementary school. They were thrilled, and I was worried about getting this podcast ready for you. The house just isn't as quiet on a snow day as it is on a work day. Then right before my interview with Sarah, the power went out due to the wind and the snow. And this isn't a regular thing at the beginning of April to have such a wild and crazy snowstorm. Sarah is in sunny California, so she didn't have to deal with the snowstorm except on my end, but she is at a yoga teacher training today. But she managed to reschedule our call when the snowstorm knocked the power out and find some time on her lunch break to talk with us about accessible yoga and specifically the Accessible Yoga Conference that's happening in Toronto. So thank you so much for that, Sarah, for just rolling with our winter storm day in April. As some of you know, I've signed up to attend the Accessible Yoga Conference in Toronto. It's June 22nd, 23rd, 24th in 2018. It would be amazing to see you there. If you are attending, make sure to reach out and let me know. After the Saturday workshops, we plan on having a gathering for any yoga teachers that want to attend. I will keep you posted once details are kind of settled and confirmed. If you can't make this conference in Toronto, there are other dates and locations. You just need to visit accessibleyoga.org to find out more. Before we meet Sarah today, let's hear our hot tip of the week from our sponsor, Schedulicity.
Hello, Connected Yoga teachers. This is Matt with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. One way to make your yoga practice more accessible is to empower potential new students with information and inspiration before they walk through the door. By describing your classes and workshops on Schedulicity, students can educate themselves before choosing the type of yoga instruction that's right for them. They can sign up for a class instantly while their curiosity is piqued and know that a spot will be waiting for them. What better way to start a new yoga journey than by feeling welcomed and included before the class even begins?
Thank you for that hot tip, Matt. I really appreciate how you brought this in, that we can start right from when we write our class description to allow students to feel included and welcome. I have to say that after talking with Sarah today in this interview and just going over some of the changes that have happened with me in my own yoga teaching journey, I feel like I'm looking even more at how I can make my classes accessible and very welcoming and enable students to feel like they really belong in yoga class. Maybe you have heard of this accessible yoga movement, or maybe this is the first time that you are hearing about it and the conference in Toronto. Accessible Yoga, as they define it on their website, is an international advocacy organization focusing on sharing yoga with all. This is an organization that is passionate about advocating to make yoga more inclusive. And as a yoga teacher, I'm just reflecting that really that is what we learn in our teacher training. And I feel like we all want to do that. So I don't think it's that the desire isn't there. And so I started trying to find a few questions for myself and for just you, the listener, to really ask what makes a yoga class accessible. And I feel like the answer is going to be very different for everyone. An easy place to start is to ask if your space is wheelchair accessible. And I know that some of you are teaching in spaces like myself, restored churches or community centers, and some of them in our small rural communities are not wheelchair accessible. And myself, I know that I meet people at the studio in group classes, and they need to be able to do a small flight of stairs at our studio. It's just the way it's set up. It's an old restored church. And then I also work at a physiotherapy office, which obviously is very wheelchair accessible. We have all of the doors so that someone can easily enter the building. It's all on one level. And so I see what a difference it makes in just saying, you're welcome here and come on in. What are some of the other ways that we can make a yoga class accessible? If we are saying that a class is all levels, is that really true? Can all levels attend? Can someone in a chair who's unable to get down onto the ground, onto a yoga mat, attend a class alongside someone who is very mobile, very able-bodied, and wants a more vigorous flow class? So I think that's important when we're looking at that class description, like Matt talked about in the hot tip. What is the description, and is it really telling someone what this class will be like? Also, are your cues and your language that you're using, is that inclusive? So a really great example of this is when I first started teaching prenatal yoga, then those students went on to have babes, and then they came to what we were calling at the time baby and mom yoga. And so you can see right there that wasn't including if there were stay-at-home dads or two dads in a family. So we changed that name pretty early on to be Baby and Me. Another example of this is prenatal yoga. I'm always very cautious and careful to say partner or birth partner instead of husband, wife. Another question to ask yourself is a student able to attend your class if they've had a recent injury or surgery? And I don't mean attend your class and do the class without modifications. Sometimes students want to come for the community aspect. So could someone come to your class and sit there and participate in the meditation, the pranayama, and be part of that group energy? So a great example of this that I can think of is in my yoga teacher training. We were told, as long as you show up, you can even show up and sleep on the floor or sit in meditation. It's really more about being there for yourself in your own practice. And we know that in the 8 limbs of yoga, asana is just one small part. So can we make it more inclusive that if someone does have an injury, can they still be coming to class and feel like they don't have to do the class? They are doing their yoga without doing all of the movements that maybe they could do before. Another example of this, and I keep pulling from prenatal because that's one thing that really taught me to start modifying my classes, was working with pregnant students. So for example, a student in very late 3rd trimester may not want to do any yoga. And I always tell them, hey, come to class, sit on the birthing ball, hang out with your friends, tell us how you're feeling, do whatever you want to do if there's some movement that feels really good, but otherwise feel free to just come and and attend the class. And so often they will. And I love it when they attend in first trimester and they hear that message and they think, oh, that's not going to happen. I'm always going to be full of energy. But I've had people attend prenatal yoga right up until due date, which was the next date. So you can see how that person needs to be resting and really nurturing self and listening to the messages that the body and the mind are offering. Another question to ask yourself is if a student has certain movement limitations, whether it's from an injury and it's going to slowly change, or it's just the way their body is built, can you modify the poses? And Sarah's going to talk about that a little bit today. And her take on this is really the same as mine. I feel like the biggest factor in this, or the biggest help, is to change the direction in relationship to gravity. I'm going to share a little bit more on that, just some personal examples after the interview with Sarah today. Emotionally, are our students feeling like our classes are accessible to them? Can students in your class speak up and ask questions, or do they feel like they have to be quiet and just follow along? Do you feel equal to your students? Do you value them and their inner knowledge? Can students talk to each other before or after class, or is there time of silence? And if there is there a place where they can connect in community? Would someone of a specific religion feel out of place, or do they feel welcome in your yoga space? So these are all questions that are making me think a lot, just around the language that I use, how I make my posters, what my class description says. Even I'm curious what other people are saying about my classes in terms of word of mouth. Like, are my students feeling what I want them to feel, included, welcome, and that my classes are accessible? Also, before we hear from Sarah today, I want to just a big shout out of thanks to the founder of Accessible Yoga, Giovanna Heyman, who in 2007 ran the first accessible yoga teacher training focused on teaching yoga to individuals with disabilities. This is really how this term, accessible yoga, began, and it is just growing with tremendous momentum. So I feel like the organizers of this are just trying to get everything in place, keep everyone informed, and trying to keep up with this. Sarah was saying that she was part of one of the first conferences, and it was really very small, and it just grew and snowballed right away. So let's dive in and hear from Sarah. She's, as I said, the Director of Communications and Marketing for the Accessible Yoga organization. She began her yoga journey at 18 when a friend suggested she try a class at the local gym. At the end of college, Sarah traveled to Bali for a 200-hour yoga teacher training, which incorporated vinyasa, vini-yoga, and Thai yoga massage. Sarah's life and career as a yoga teacher changed completely when she was contacted by a high-profile triathlon coach to share yoga with disabled athletes. She's worked with students who have cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injuries, amputations, visual impairments, spinal cord injury, chronic pain, and nerve damage. A few years ago, Sarah partnered with the Accessible Yoga movement in Santa Barbara to become one of the organization's first accessible yoga ambassadors. And Sarah's going to talk more about that in the interview today. So let's dive in and meet Sarah. So welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Sarah. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me, and by proxy, Accessible Yoga.
Yeah, so tell our listeners, because I've been talking already on the podcast about the Accessible Yoga Conference. So do you want to tell us about that first?
Sure. I got involved with the second Accessible Yoga Conference. I attended the first in 2015. If you come to an Accessible Yoga Conference, first of all, you'll meet a lot of incredible people, either instructors or practitioners of all different walks of life. I think that's the thing that pleases me the most in traveling and teaching and working with these conferences, is meeting so many different souls and so many different personalities from all over the world. And we have, it's a 2.5-day conference. So we have an opening ceremony. You'll hear a keynote from one of our incredible lead instructors. This year at the Toronto conference, our keynote speech will be by Diane Bondi, which I'm super excited about. She's such a vibrant public speaker. And then we just have a get to know you activity after afterwards, a little reception. Usually we have some munchies and you get to meet some other practitioners. And then for the next 2 days, you have either lecture or opportunities to practice or opportunities to go to sessions that will include community members like yourself in your community working either accessibly or maybe they call their yoga something different, but they're working in an inclusive manner. And then we have a closing ceremony on Sunday night. So that's kind of the basic outline. And we have a lot of fun when we do it.
That's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the one this year, and it's fun that it's in Toronto. It's not too far. So tell us a little bit about you. What got you into yoga?
Oh, goodness. What got me into yoga is that I was a performer. I was an actor from like age 5 all the way through college. And I was a very, sometimes they use the term psychophysical performers, which means that like I worked ensemble based. So I worked with a group of performers and usually we would do a lot of physical scoring, which means almost kind of dance like physical material that would complement our dialogue. So through that, basically I had to stop dancing in college because my program was really rigorous. And I ended up like needing an outlet and the outlet became yoga. Yeah, so that's me personally. As far as accessible yoga, like how I got into working with persons living with disabilities, I was living in Chicago as a performer and a yoga teacher. And it was one of those kind of like happenstance, serendipitous things in the yoga world where like I was auditioning for theater and for entertainment stuff and also for yoga. And I was booking every yoga gig I auditioned for and like some performance but nothing that was paying me. And I was like, well, to survive, I guess I'll just throw more energy to yoga. And in that process, I led some workshops for people who were ultra or marathon runners or endurance athletes. And ironically, one of the coaches, or maybe not ironically, I shouldn't probably use that word, but one of the coaches had a whole second division of her athleticism that was geared towards persons with disabilities. So she asked me if I would be interested in using yin yoga for some of her disabled endurance athletes. And I was like, yeah, like bring it on, whatever, kind of ignorant and naive and thinking that like I could do anything, right, as a very beginning yoga teacher. And the funny thing is like, in fact, I can, like in fact, you can do anything you set your mind to. You just have to appreciate where your clients are coming from and do the research. So I ended up, before I knew it, having in kind of pre-integrated classrooms. Like sometimes people think like, oh, people with disabilities, maybe they needed their own separate class. But I was always like, it kind of never occurred to me that this population was so marginalized. Again, a big part of my naivete in the beginning. And so my classes were initially integrated and it gave me this experience of like how the world could be, the yoga world and the real world, if we were actually integrated. And so it was a restorative hyphen yin style practice, really geared towards releasing the muscles that were used if you were either pushing for 26 miles, like pushing long distance as a wheelchair athlete, or geared towards psoas, quadricep, hamstring, the stuff that gets really tight, happy hips and hamstrings, right, for the people who are running long distance. Right. So that's kind of how I fell into it. And then over time, my client base, over a very short period of time, again, in a very serendipitous way, my persons with disabilities, my private client base grew more and more to have mostly people with disabilities, more than quote unquote able-bodied practitioners of yoga. And I found through kind of like polling my clients that for a lot of neuropathic pain, so like nerve pain, and a lot of issues with insomnia and sleep, and a lot of issues with being addicted to pain medication and to the pills that help with insomnia, depression, aiding in rest and sleep, that yoga became the best medicine for a lot of my clients. Or I would say maybe like the most useful. It wouldn't make them feel logy or strange or not like themselves. It made them feel more like themselves. And through this process, they were able to release a lot of their attachment to pain medication and sleep better and just feel better through yoga and on their own.
That's amazing. And I'm wondering, with the niche work, like that really defined niche, my curiosity is, do you feel like you gravitated towards that, or you gained more people because you were really excited about it? Or was there a certain skill that you had? Or do you think it was just kind of the way things worked and it worked out that that's the group that you were mainly teaching to?
That's such a great question as far as like business for yoga teachers go. because I totally fell into it. Like never through my like 5 years of like performance school and all that rigor of education in a different platform. Never did I think my life would become like facilitating conferences, education, and teacher trainings for yoga, let alone yoga for persons with disabilities. And as an able-bodied person myself, this niche, like the niche market, I kind of like struggle with it because I'm not a part of that community technically as an able-bodied person, but like this has clearly become my soul's work. You know, it's like I said, it was really easy. I was kind of like sociopolitically active before. I mean, you know, I had a lot of opinions, but I think through this, I was able to lend like my well-articulated voice as a performer to an issue that I felt really strongly about. But as far as like gearing myself, like my business towards it, as I started to develop more private clients, it just became clear to me, like, if I want to make a living, then I should just keep doing that. And if I want to keep doing this, then I should get better at it. And I should become more educated, and I should talk to the people who are already doing it well, and learn from them.
That's amazing. So is there anything that you know now that you think, wow, if I would have known that near the beginning, this would have made my life doing this job, teaching this accessible form of yoga, it would have been easier?
No.
Was it just the experience then?
Yeah, no, I like really wanted to think of some super like eloquent quote, but like, no, like I think just throwing myself into it, honestly, some of my naivete and my ignorance in the beginning, I mean, it served me so well. Like I said, you know, like it never would have occurred to me that it might make able-bodied people uncomfortable to be with disabled people in a class, because I was like, that's dumb. You know, the responsibility, and I feel this way sociopolitically as well. Like, I think it's really unfair that marginalized populations, such as people with disabilities, that like they have to shoulder the burden to make society accept them. You know, I think that's really unfair, and I think that we should support them fully and completely. They are people too, and you know, life is hard for everyone in their own unique way, whether or not you can, for example, move your legs or feel your legs, or, you know, and I think that unification will serve our world as a whole. So as far as like giving my older self advice, don't take it so seriously. That would be like the only thing, you know, because if I was very worried about hurting people, and I do think it's important, like just to segue into our accessible yoga teacher trainings, which I've been given the blessing of our founder, Jivana Heyman, to begin leading them as well. It is important to me that yoga teachers do know the anatomy and the action happening behind each posture, but I don't think they should be afraid to take agency and modify poses maybe before they think they are the greatest teacher ever. Just allow yourself to be in that place of being a new student, being a beginner, either a beginner leader, or a beginner practitioner, and enjoy the ride. I remember when my business kind of started growing a little bit, Jivana said to me, I wanted it to happen faster, right? You know, you always want oh, this is one success. Now I want a lot of successes, you know? I remember Jivana saying to me, be happy that it goes slow. You know, it's so fortunate that things take time.
Right.
You know, and it's true, I wouldn't sacrifice the 7 years of learning to be where I am now in the beginning.
Oh, that's a really good piece of advice, because I think we often feel like that, you know, even as new yoga teachers, or like you said, once you'd kind of found where you wanted to be, if you had all of the success come all at once, you probably couldn't keep up with it. So
I know, it's like excessive joy, right? You're if you're so happy, sometimes you feel so happy your heart could explode, and it's almost not happy to be so overwhelmed. So I'm pleased with the little steps that I take every day to get to some goal, and I try to practice non-attachment with the result.
Right. So one of our listeners asked me, Shannon, why is there this separate yoga conference in Toronto? Why can't the accessible yoga people come to the Toronto Yoga Show? And I was like, that's a great question. I'm going to ask Sarah.
Well, I wish I could defer to Katie Juleson, who's our main liaison in Toronto, as far as the accessibility of the city. So I think one of the reasons that we wanted to put the programs together, the conferences together in the first place, is that things like the Yoga Alliance or the Yoga Journal conferences, they were not made accessible. It was all flow classes. It was all like standing up and sitting down and jumping forward and bending over completely backwards. There's almost no props. They're usually in these conference centers that might have an elevator in them, but predominantly are stairs and not actually accessible for people with disabilities. Or not, like maybe they're ADA accessible, like they fill what slim government regulations they must fill, but they don't necessarily make it actually easy. And I think we forget that a lot, like how much space does. I was just traveling recently in Nepal, and I was thinking like, oh, I'd love to bring my clients on an exotic trip such as this to these sacred spaces, but like you can't get a wheelchair up here. You can't get even a wheelchair in some of these, like in some of the main floor, first floor bath. And so I think that's one of the main reasons that we chose to kind of separate ourselves and create a whole nother conference. So like actual physical accessibility, also financial accessibility. Sometimes conferences can be quite expensive. And so we have a whole scholarship program. Like a lot of our people on disability or who are living on disability are able to get a scholarship, either partial, if not full, to the conference and the trainings. And then the really good reason. I think when a population feels marginalized, or like a lot of my friends and my clients with disabilities, they tend to keep to themselves. They tend to kind of want to kind of be with their own, so to speak, or in another direction, like the society kind of forces them to be together. So why not create like a happy, welcoming, open, integrated space that is accessible for them physically, financially, and socially already. So they don't have to navigate all of that like social misery just to get to the yoga class to find out it's a flow that they can't even do.
Right. I was so impressed even with the package of like when I registered for the conference. So just the information online in terms of like, here's how to get around in Toronto. And I'm an able-bodied person, but I just felt like there was more care in terms of like, here's where to park, here's where to go, here are for people who are in a wheelchair. Like there were all kinds of options. Like I don't even remember how many pages it was on the information. And I thought, this is amazing.
Yeah, the resource guide is another pet project from our Toronto team, which is like, if I had 1,000 hands, it wouldn't be a loud enough applause for the amount of work that they've done. They're like, the Toronto team has pulled this together themselves completely, really. I mean, not completely, but almost. And we really have them to thank for that fabulous resource guide. But that's like one of the many things that I think a lot of us kind of entitled, able-bodied people don't think about. Like I can hop on and go to Nepal, for example, and kind of throw caution to the wind. But if I was a person living in a wheelchair, or if I had a congenital issue or MS or something that can flare up, even like fibromyalgia or depression, something that's an invisible disability, right? That could overtake me or overcome it. I can't fly by the seat of my pants, right? And I think a lot of us able-bodied kind of forget that there are people who really need to meticulously plan and know where they're going to go, know where there's going to be an accessible bathroom. And you should never feel judged or wrong or bad or different for needing that plan,
Mm-hmm. No, and that's what I felt like. There was a real care for the tiny details of this conference. So and then the lineup of people speaking and the topics, I feel like it's amazing to have that offered all in one package, in one conference, one weekend. So yeah.
I would say so. I feel like I tell Jeevana a lot, like we have a presenter problem, as in they're all wonderful and there are too many of them.
That was my biggest issue, was to choose which one I was going to. And I also appreciate that there weren't too many choices, because that's the tricky part.
Yeah, and I think we started out with more choices, and then we kind of slimmed our list because people would complain like, I wanted to go to that class, and then they didn't offer it again. And I think, we're still definitely in a learning phase. This is the Accessible Yoga's first international year. We have the Toronto conference in June, which the training is right before the conference, and then we have our European conference in October, and the training is right after.
Right.
So I think everything is like still in the process of learning.
Oh, yeah.
How do you, and as we change cities, which we do just about every conference still, we're thinking of trying to find like a main city that we come back to. Even that, it's like brand new learning experience every single time, you know?
What is, if you could summarize what the accessible yoga teacher training is like, what would that be?
If I could summarize the accessible yoga teacher training, it would be 4 days of sincere exploration into what you already know and how what you already know can be useful if you articulate it in a different way. So like some teachers, just in one sentence, but I feel like some teacher trainings are kind of this sort of like tear your previous knowledge down in order to bring you or build you up in a new way. And these trainings really expect you to come in. I mean, you don't have to come in with a lot of knowledge, but they expect you to come in with opinions, with experiences, with knowledge. And we don't ask you to change all of that. We just ask you to maybe think about it in a different way or like turn it on its side. I like to joke about like playing with gravity, like how do you teach an inversion to a person who's sitting in a wheelchair? How can you play with gravity? How can you put the head and the heart on the same field without completely like blowing your mind or changing your, your set ways? Why can't you just, turn them a little bit or just twist them a little bit and have what you already know be just as useful as the knowledge that you're currently gaining?
That's amazing. Is there anything that you would hope that yoga teachers are adding in to make their yoga classes more accessible?
I think that like for me, it really happens from the greeting, from like the moment that students walk in the door. For me, it's making sure that teachers aren't, I like to be creative and kind of, like I said before, fly by the seat of my pants. But if you have a student who comes in, I think what I would love is if fewer teachers had the hiccup or like the sheer panic of being unprepared. Because the fact of the matter is you are prepared. You are fully prepared. Even if your teacher training wasn't specifically an accessible yoga teacher training, every yoga teacher has hurt their shoulder or pulled their abs or tweaked their back and had to modify or had to take a break. So I think from the moment that you greet people, making sure you're inclusive and excited for them to be there and ready to take the challenge of modifying maybe one or two people in a classroom full of souls that are all there for the same reason, right?
Mm-hmm. You're making me think back to a class in my early days as a yoga teacher where someone who was an amputee showed up into my class, and there was that initial like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Terrified.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, yeah, it is. It totally. It really is. It's a funny dance you do with your ego, right? And just to remind yourself that it's like that's just your ego. It's just your ego thinking that things should be a certain way, or that they always are a certain way, or that your ego is just like, whoa, I don't know how to do this. But your ego is wrong. Like your Atman, your soul, your true self is like, no. You just have to put yourself in the place of that person. And I think if you allow yourself to be open to that part of your brain, stepping into the shoes of someone else, or the shoe, if they happen to be an amputee, right? Or, you just say, okay, well, how would I modify this? Would I put a block here? Would I put them near a wall? And also that, I think if I had like one little piece of advice to teachers, I would say, like, don't forget about the wall. Like, the wall is the most underappreciated and underutilized. You don't have to have a crazy hook hanging Iyengar wall. Like, the person who is blind just needs a physical reference, really, for balance poses.
Right.
And I think it can be just as simple as that. You don't have to put that person in the corner, but if you put them near a wall, they may be grounded.
Right. Well, yeah, that's good. Very good awareness. So you are away right now. I'm really appreciating that we were even able to connect today with our interview, because through snowstorms and power outages, we were able to connect and chat. So you will be at the Toronto Accessible Yoga Conference then?
Yes, I will be I'll be at the Toronto Accessible Yoga Conference. Yes, I will. I'll probably be there a couple days early. I tend to hop into the trainings and assist, get my hands on people a little bit.
Right. Nice. And then how can people connect with you if they want to find out more?
If you want to find out more about accessible yoga in general, really easy. You can go and email info at accessibleyoga.org, and then just put like the subject matter, obviously in the subject line, like do you want to know about marketing or participation or scholarships? Because we have a number of committees, like I'm in charge of communications, for example. So if you love Facebook and you love Instagram or Twitter, I definitely need a tweeter on my team. Then you can feel free to email me specifically, Sarah at Accessible Yoga, and that's Sarah with an H.
Amazing.
Oh, and it's I always forget that, accessibleyoga.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, I have this question, speaking of Facebook. Someone was telling me the other day, or I saw someone's profile picture, and it said that they were an Accessible Yoga ambassador. Do you have some information about that?
Sure. The ambassador program is currently being revised. So right now you get a meme and you get connected to the rest of our ambassadors. We actually have hundreds of ambassadors. Our desire in the future is to, and we've already have a lot of this filmed, it's in the editing process. Our desire for the future is to create continuing education that our ambassadors get for a very discounted, if not free price. So you pay a small membership fee to become an ambassador, and then you get all this education for free. You get discounts on either merchandise or conference passes. But currently, right now, we have something like 15 to 20, we might have 20 at this point, Facebook groups of ambassadors all over the world. So you can become an ambassador. You get a meme, which is like a cute little picture with our logo and your picture together, to use as your profile picture if you like, or to use on any documentation. Like I've seen a lot of our ambassadors place their memes or place our accessible yoga logo on the bottom of their email, like their signature. So you get some of those PDFs and documents to use at your leisure, I guess. But if you want to know more about that program, you can also go to the website, accessibleyoga.org, and look under ambassadors. Initially, we had begun a network, and we're such in our infancy, and we grew so quickly. We have a map of the whole world, and you're able to register as an ambassador with classes as well. So that's another feature of the ambassador program. You can list your classes like a register or a registry of you could say I'm in Toronto, Ontario, or I'm in Des Moines, Iowa, or Venice, Italy, and I lead these classes 3 times a week, and they're accessible in these ways. So that's another aspect of becoming an ambassador.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was really curious about it because I saw different people popping up. Well, I am excited that we get to actually probably meet in person when I come to the conference in June. And I know on the Saturday night, there's someone on the team who was it was one of the ambassadors that said, I'm from Toronto, and yes, let's plan a little gathering on the Saturday night so people can meet and chat. And so that's still in the work happening.
In the works.
Yeah.
I think it will occur. Yeah. We also have a community panel. I believe it's on Sunday. So if you are in the Toronto area, if you're a teacher or a student looking for a teacher, we have a whole session dedicated to the community that we're in specifically. So you can come with your promotional material, you get 5 minutes to speak. We prefer if you try and make contact with the person who's running that session beforehand so they can write your name down and stuff. And we have enough time for everyone to have time to speak. But that's another opportunity to share your work or connect with people who are working in the fashion that you want to learn at the community session. I think that's on Sunday morning. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know you're on your lunch break. So
yeah, but I would carve out any time for you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Take care. Well, connected yoga teachers, how are you doing now? Lots of information. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. If there's one key takeaway that I've had, and I've been thinking about it since our call ended here today, I have been thinking about how there are kind of 2 sides of this. That Sarah was saying to us, she kind of landed in this place and then decided to dig in and learn from people who were doing this accessible yoga work. And at the same same time I was hearing her say, her experience of being in there, being in the moment, working one-on-one with people was also really fueling her knowledge. So I feel like this gives a bit of freedom to us as yoga teachers to really not know it all. Go out there and explore and work with people one-on-one. I actually want to dig into something today. I had a student approach me this week and was asking questions about doing one-on-one work with yoga students. So this yoga teacher is just about to finish a yoga teacher training and also has some very significant training in another healthcare field. And this yoga teacher, soon to be yoga teacher grad, was asking me when she would be ready to work one-on-one with people. And it's so amazing how just a couple of sentences that I said to her shifted things very fast. So I said to her, when were you ready to work as a healthcare worker one-on-one with people versus a group? And so we have this whole mentality that we come out of a yoga teacher training and then we'll teach to a large group of people, but then we need to do something else to be ready to teach one-on-one. And I will tell you, from many years of now working one-on-one with people, I get that feeling. I remember thinking I need more training to work one-on-one with people. But in reality, working with one person, you have their feedback, you can ask them, you can see their face, you can modify right there in the moment. You're not doing an all levels class. You don't need to work with two different bodies in two different experiences. So I want you to know that you have all of the skills graduating your yoga teacher training to work one-on-one with people. Can you build on that? Yes, you sure can. You can do things like take the accessible yoga teacher training or maybe a yoga therapy training, something that makes you feel like you can really serve a certain population. I also love how Sarah talked about how the accessible yoga teacher training doesn't take what you know and tear that down. Instead, they build on that foundation. And that has been something that I'm still really pondering. I love interviews like that, where there's one snippet of it that makes me think, like, am I offering that when I do a teacher training? Am I finding teacher trainings that are going from that, building on that foundation instead of tearing down? And I know there are some times where we have to kind of tear back what we've learned and learn something new or add a new piece to it as well. To wrap up here today, I wanted to give a few examples of how I feel I'm either looking at how I can make my yoga more accessible for people, or how I can make my own yoga practice a little more accessible even for myself. So I want to share those with you. One pose that I really love to modify now, and I no longer teach the traditional pose any longer, is pigeon pose. This is really one of my favorite modifications, and that's pigeon pose or figure 4 at the wall. So it's almost like legs up the wall, but you're a little bit further away from the wall so that your knees can bend at 90 degrees and your feet are on the wall. From there, you can cross one ankle onto the opposite knee. And I really like to encourage students to not use their hands, because sometimes we need to scooch back and move away from the wall a little bit more if something's going on in the hips. And also, I love to really talk about not even touching the legs or the knees, really allowing things to just fall into place, allowing the arms to relax by the side. This is one time where it's a little difficult to share this via podcast, but I know that a lot of you do this pose and know this pose well. And so if you think about flipping that, so that's your traditional pigeon pose, but without so much pressure on the knee. And it was students with knee injuries coming to class that really made me challenge how I was doing pigeon. And also in my own yoga practice, I was feeling a lot of sensitivity around my knee. And so I flipped it to do this onto the wall. The other way we can do this, and I'm actually sitting like this right now doing the podcast, is in that figure 4 at chair. So you cross opposite ankle onto opposite knee sitting in a chair. So this is a great example of how we're facing gravity can change a yoga pose. So thank you for bringing that forward today, Sarah. I also wanted to share a story about an all levels class that I taught. And when I advertised all levels, I am sure in my mind I did not have the all levels that I actually saw come to class. So I had a woman come to class in her 90s. She could sit in a chair, she couldn't get down on the floor. But after a few classes, and I'll tell you, there was some panic going on in me, just trying to keep the people who were wanting a more moderate yoga class, keeping them going, and then making sure that this woman in the chair was still feeling like she was having a yoga class as well. But a few classes in, she told me that she felt like she had learned how to breathe for the first time in her life. So that's really profound. Not all of our yoga students are going to be sharing that, but I just want you to have that nugget if you do want to teach an all levels class, that offering breath and meditation is a lot. You're giving someone a lot. Sarah talked about that. She would really like yoga teachers to feel like they don't have that hiccup, that moment of panic when a student comes to class. And as you heard, I shared that an amputee came to my class, and Sarah hit it right on the head when she said it's ego, because that was my biggest worry, was that I was going to say something wrong, that I was going to cue the leg or the foot that yoga student didn't have. To be quite honest, we got into the groove in a few classes, or more so I got into the groove of just knowing that the student was coming to class and kind of forgetting about, okay, that I have to change my whole way of cueing, being aware of it, but also just being like, this is the class. And that student knew exactly how to modify. That student was an athlete, had done yoga before, was showing up, and just wanted like an accessible yoga class, someone who's not going to point things out and just let that person be in that experience. So I did have to, and I still have to, when students show up with an injury, to kind of take a step back and know that I don't have to have all of the answers. It's helpful when I understand a condition or what someone is going through, but I can't know that for every condition. Another piece I want to add in here is how I've been looking at my own yoga classes in terms of trauma sensitive. And that's really since we heard from Margaret Howard way early on in the podcast. I think it was episode 3, where Margaret told us that everyone walking into our class has had some form of trauma in their life, whether they recognize it or not, that we're all walking around kind of holding on to some kind of trauma that could just come up and be triggered. So it's interesting to me, and I really listened to Margaret when she said this needs to be part of every 200-hour yoga teacher training. And then I was listening to Sarah thinking, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if accessible yoga was part of every yoga teacher training? And I do also realize that there is only so much time in a 200-hour yoga teacher training, and that we really need to pick what resonates with us. And there are so many different subjects, but I wonder if there could be. And of course, I also feel really passionate about prenatal yoga. I feel like that should be part of every 200-hour. But is there some way that we could have a trauma-sensitive, prenatal-ready, accessible yoga component to a yoga teacher training? And if you have that in your 200-hour, I would love to hear about it. Please reach out and tell me about it. There's a podcast that I started listening to in the last year, and it's called Sick Boy. If you listen in the car with young ears, or if you are sensitive to cursing, you are maybe not going to like this podcast as much as I do. I like it, cursing and all. I think it's a really lighthearted podcast about very serious topics. So basically, these 3 guys interview people with various conditions, anything from depression to MS to you name it. They try and get someone on the podcast, and they ask them really in-depth questions, and it gives you such an awareness of what that individual is going through in their life with whatever challenges they are dealing with. And one episode, I can't remember the number, gave me such an awareness into how someone is feeling in a wheelchair if someone says that they're wheelchair bound. So they like to instead be called a wheelchair user or in a wheelchair, or that not even be part of the vocabulary. And I think that's amazing how we've been talking about this in terms of if you think of what the language says around wheelchair bound. So if you're looking to understand different conditions on a whole new level, and I mean it, a really in-depth level, I would definitely recommend listening to Sick Boy. Last question here I'd like to just throw out is, are you making your own practice accessible? So if you go to a group class or you go to your mat at home, can you make yoga accessible for yourself that day? And this is something I'm playing around with and looking at and how my yoga practice changes and what my expectations are. I would also love to hear from you if you feel like you've found some gem of making your yoga class accessible, or your yoga teacher training where you're adding something in so that your teachers that you are working with have a more accessible yoga class. One more note, just a totally fun note, is that at the Accessible Yoga Conference, they're going to try and set a world record for the world's largest accessible yoga class. That's part of the conference, and I'm really excited to go to the conference, be part of that world record class, see what that's like, and also just to really learn so you guys can be sure that I will come home and tell you all the many things that I take in at that conference. And I'll even try and post in the Facebook group that we have, and maybe on my Instagram. We'll see. I'm not on that as much, but definitely in the Facebook group, I'll try and pop in and just share some key takeaways of that conference. Already connected yoga teachers, have a fantastic week. Stay connected to self, to your practice, and to your community so that you can really embrace the yoga that lights you up.